"You're not safe here." The words came in silence, spelled not with breath, but with hands. Ava Johnson, 22, a young black waitress with careful eyes and a shy demeanor, lowered the wine bottle she carried and let her fingers move quickly, deliberately. She had learned sign language at home, the only way to speak with her mother, who was both mute and deaf. Tonight, in this restaurant of chandeliers and velvet chairs, that hidden skill cut through the din like a blade. Across the linen-draped table sat Margaret Whitmore, a 74-year-old widow of a once prominent industrialist family. Margaret was gentle by reputation, philanthropic by instinct. She had been born deaf, and though she wore a discreet hearing aid behind her ear, its signal faltered now, leaving her lost in the swell of voices. Ava's unexpected signing had startled her, then lifted her face with sudden relief. At last, someone she could understand. But Margaret froze as the waitress's hands shaped those jarring words. Her pale eyes widened, disbelief mixing with fear. Slowly, haltingly, she signed back, "Safe, from who?" The reply never came, because before Ava could continue, another presence cut through the moment. Richard Whitmore, Margaret's only son, slid his chair back with measured grace. He was 43, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, his hair combed to order, his features carved with the precision of entitlement. Richard carried himself the way powerful men often do, as though every room was his, every silence a stage waiting to applaud him. Cold calculation hardened his expression, and when his gaze fell on Ava, it was a blade unsheathed. "Enough," Richard said, his voice soft yet lethal, each syllable placed with surgical contempt. He leaned forward, pinning the waitress beneath his stare. "She doesn't know what she's saying." The restaurant stilled. Forks lowered mid-air, champagne glasses hovered just shy of lips. A murmur died on someone's tongue. The grand chandelier hummed faintly above, its glow casting sharp light on faces turned to watch. Ava felt her pulse leap. Her hands dropped to her sides, trembling slightly. She had not meant for so many eyes to catch it, for her warning to spill into the open like that. She had only meant for Margaret to know, for her to sense the danger Ava had glimpsed in shadows, in whispers, in the subtle exchange of papers behind closed doors. Margaret's fingers twitched in her lap, wanting to ask again, but the moment had been severed. Richard's body loomed, his hand resting on the table with casual authority, his gaze daring anyone nearby to contradict him. The tension spread outward, invisible but suffocating, like smoke filling a hall. Diners glanced at one another, unsure whether they had witnessed something real or imagined. Managers lingered at the edges.
Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us.
Their smiles frozen, calculating what response would please the man who, after all, held the reins of this very establishment. Ava stood there, caught in the silence she had created, every second stretching longer than the last. She could feel the scrutiny pressing down, her colleagues stiff behind the service station, the guests' eyes narrowing, Richard's glare slicing through her like ice. Margaret reached, faintly, toward her water glass. Her hand trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She wanted to ask, to insist, but years of being disregarded had taught her the price of pressing too far. So she sat still, her frail shoulders hunched, her eyes darting between her son and the waitress who had dared to breach the wall of silence. Richard leaned closer to his mother, lowering his voice just enough for those near to hear, but leaving no doubt of his dominance. "Ignore her. She's confused. She was hired to serve, nothing more." The humiliation rang louder than any raised voice. Ava forced herself to nod, to step back, but her heart thundered. Her warning had reached its mark. She had seen Margaret's shock, her fear. Whether Richard smothered it now or not, the seed had been planted. Around them, conversation struggled to resume, thin laughter bubbling up like water over cracked stone. But the air remained fractured, every guest feeling the weight of something unsaid. The manager, a wiry man with sharp eyes, hurried forward, bowing slightly toward Richard. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone deferential. Richard's smile was tight, controlled. Perfectly, he said. Then after a deliberate pause, he added, our waitress was simply overstepping. The word landed like a hammer. Overstepping. Ava kept her head down, her throat dry. She wanted to vanish into the gleam of silver trays, into the anonymity of the kitchen. But she also knew the warning could not be unsaid. Margaret had heard it, had seen it, and the truth, however dangerous, was out. The chandelier light caught the silver in Margaret's hair as she looked at Ava once more, her eyes searching, pleading, but bound by her son's shadow. And so the night resumed, but not as before. The diners picked up their utensils. The glasses clinked again, but the tension lingered. A question hung in the air, unspoken yet heavy. Why had a trembling waitress signed such words? Was it mere folly, or was it the first crack in a facade too carefully built? For Margaret, the words echoed louder than the chatter returning around her. You're not safe here. And for Ava, standing with her tray pressed hard against her ribs, the risk she had taken already began to close in. Because warnings come at a cost, and in this room of chandeliers and polished power, that cost would soon be demanded. The silence that followed Richard Whitmore's interruption did not dissolve when Ava Johnson slipped away from the table. It trailed her into the service corridor like a shadow. The manager was waiting. Martin Hale, mid-50s, a wiry man with slick-back hair and the sour face of someone long accustomed to bowing to power, blocked her path. He was the general manager of the Whitmore restaurant, a man who smiled at wealth, but sneered at weakness. Tonight his expression carried neither. Office, now. His tone was clipped. Inside the cramped office lined with wine inventories and security monitors, Martin shut the door behind them and crossed his arms. What were you thinking? His voice was low, but the venom in it was unmistakable. Ava's palms dampened. She kept her eyes lowered. Mrs. Whitmore's hearing aid was failing. You embarrassed a guest. Not just any guest. The owner's mother. He leaned in, his breath acrid with coffee. Do you have any idea what kind of damage that could cause? I was only trying to help her understand, Ava said, her voice careful, controlled. Martin's lips thinned. That little show with your hands, you think that was helping? Looked a lot like you were trying to make yourself the center of attention. This isn't about you, Ava. It never was. She swallowed hard. I wasn't. Save it, he snapped. If it were up to me, you'd be out already. Mr. Whitmore has been gracious enough not to demand it yet, but you're on thin ice. His eyes narrowed, calculating. One more step out of line, one more stunt, and you're finished here. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. The words were barely audible. Good. Now get back to work, and keep your head down where it belongs. When she left the office, Ava could feel the eyes. Other waiters leaned against the corridor wall whispering. The hostess paused mid-step, her gaze sharp with disdain. In the kitchen, conversations hushed as she passed. By the time she re-emerged onto the dining floor, the story had already taken root. She tried to stir up drama, wanted the boss's mother to notice her, always knew she thought she was smarter than the rest of us. The whispers cut sharper than Martin's words, and though none of them had seen the warning she signed, they had seen the fallout. Richard Whitmore's glare, the tension across the dining room, the manager dragging her away. To them it was proof enough. Ava endured it in silence. She always had, because silence was the only thing she could afford. Her world outside the glitter of the Whitmore restaurant could not have been further from chandeliers and crystal glassware. She lived in a cramped apartment in the city's worn-out quarter, a place where plaster crumbled from the ceilings and rats claimed the walls. Her mother, once vibrant, was bedridden now, illness gnawing away at her body, her deafness isolating her further. Ava's younger brother, only 16, struggled at school and threatened to slip into the orbit of the streets. Rent was late more often than it was paid. Medicine cost more than meals. And the only lifeline that stood between her family and collapse was the paycheck she earned carrying trays through dining rooms, where people ordered champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. Losing this job was not an option, which meant enduring the scorn of her colleagues, the cruelty of her manager, and the invisible leash Richard Whitmore had looped around her neck the moment she dared to move her hands. The days that followed bled into one another. Ava returned each evening in her pressed uniform, her steps careful, her voice softer than ever, but her eyes sharpened. Richard Whitmore came to the restaurant almost daily, always the corner booth, always the best bottle of wine, always flanked by men in expensive suits. To other diners they looked like business partners, lawyers, investors. To Ava, watching from the periphery, they looked like conspirators. Their conversations were hushed but urgent, their folders always closed the moment staff drew too near. Richard rarely brought his mother. That evening had been an exception. More often he arrived with associates, politicians in tailored coats, financial advisors with sleek briefcases, lawyers whose laughter held no warmth. He spoke to them with a predator's patience, circling, measuring, striking when it suited him. Ava learned to watch, to linger by the table with a rag too long, pretending to polish glassware, to shuffle her tray slower near the VIP booths, to duck into the storage rooms and glimpse the papers briefly left behind. She memorized fragments, contract headers, bank logos, signatures half-scrawled. Her clumsiness became deliberate. A tray tipped here, a napkin dropped there, each mistake granting her a few seconds nearer to their secrets. But each stumble also drew fresh ridicule. She's always in the way. Thinks she's special because she can wave her hands around, trying to play detective now. Pathetic. Her colleagues grew harsher. They shoved the heaviest trays into her arms, shoved the filthiest tasks her way, scrubbing grease from the ovens, hauling crates through narrow halls. Their contempt burned in their eyes as much as in their orders. Even the dishwasher, a boy barely 17, rolled his eyes when she asked for help. You want attention? Earn it somewhere else. Ava bent beneath the weight, but she didn't break, because she couldn't afford to. At night, when she trudged home through alleyways reeking of rot, she thought of her mother's labored breathing, of her brother's tired face bent over textbooks by candlelight. She thought of the moment Margaret Whitmore's eyes had widened in fear, of the fragile hope in them when she asked, "Safe? From who?" And Ava knew she couldn't stop. One evening, as Richard laughed with two suited men, Ava lingered near the booth longer than she should have, feigning a struggle with a cork. She caught only a sliver of conversation, words like transfer, assets, incapacitation, before one of the men noticed her. His stare was a warning. She bowed quickly, retreating, but her pulse raced. The fragments were pieces of a puzzle she was beginning to glimpse, though the picture was still hazy. Later she slipped into the storage corridor again, pressing her back to the cold wall listening. Richard's voice carried faintly through the door. "When she's weak enough, she'll sign." The words chilled her. She didn't know yet what they meant, but she knew they mattered. In the eyes of her co-workers, though, Ava Johnson was nothing more than the lowest rung on the ladder. A timid, awkward girl pretending to be more than she was. Someone to mock, to shove aside, to bury beneath the dirtiest work. She wants to stand out. One waitress whispered, "She just wants the boss's mother to notice her. She'll burn out soon enough." Ava carried their contempt with quiet endurance, but behind her silence grew something stronger, a resolve sharper than their scorn, because she had seen the fear in Margaret Whitmore's eyes, and she had heard the malice in her son's voice. The danger was real, and if no one else would uncover it, she would, even if it meant standing alone. The chance came on a night that looked ordinary to everyone else, but Ava Johnson had been waiting. Richard Whitmore entered, not with his usual retinue of aides and bodyguards, but with his mother, Margaret. He walked her slowly to the corner booth, one hand light on her arm, his manner all filial devotion. To the casual diner, it was a tender sight, a powerful son carving time from Empire Building to share dinner with his aging mother. But to Ava, watching from the shadows of the service station, it was an opening. No lawyers hovered, no assistants lingered at his elbow. Just Richard, his mother, and the black leather briefcase he placed beside him on the banquette. Ava steadied her breath. Tonight, she told herself. Tonight, or never. She moved through the dining room with a tray tucked under her arm, her steps careful, her expression composed. She wiped at an empty table, rearranged cutlery, all to bring her closer to the booth. Her colleagues barely looked at her anymore, except with scorn. To them she was invisible, and she used that invisibility like a cloak. Margaret's hearing aid crackled, and Ava caught the older woman's small grimace. Richard leaned toward her, smiling, his lips moving, but Margaret shook her head faintly, confused. Ava's fingers twitched. She wanted to sign again, to offer words Margaret could truly grasp, but she didn't. Not this time. Instead, she drifted closer. A fork clattered deliberately from her tray, falling near Richard's seat. She bent to retrieve it, and in that swift, calculated motion, her hand slid against the edge of his briefcase. She felt the cool leather, the resistance of the latch. A second longer. The flap yielded. Her fingers closed on the thick folder inside. She drew it into the fold of her apron, rising fluidly with the recovered fork. She turned away. Stop. The word was a whip. Richard's voice cut across the dining room. Ava froze, her back stiffening. Slowly she turned. Richard's eyes blazed, his hand still resting on the briefcase, now conspicuously lighter. His voice carried, pitched for every ear in the room. What do you think you're doing? A hush spread. Diners looked up. Glasses stilled. Martin Hale, the manager, appeared at once, his instincts finely tuned to Richard's tone. What is it, sir? Richard rose, tall and immaculate, his gaze never leaving Ava. This girl was stealing from me. A collective intake of breath rippled through the restaurant. Margaret's hands fluttered. Stealing. She signed weakly. Confusion etched her lined face. Richard snatched the folder from Ava's apron, with theatrical flourish, holding it aloft like a hunter displaying his catch. Caught red-handed, he declared. Trash like this doesn't deserve to stand in a place like this, let alone serve at my table. The words struck Ava like blows. She felt her face burn, humiliation flooding her veins. She wanted to speak, but the voices around her drowned her out. Unbelievable. She was always strange. Knew she'd bring shame sooner or later. Martin Hale stepped forward, his face twisted in disdain. Get her out, he ordered. Security will handle it. A waiter seized Ava's arm. She stumbled, struggling to find her voice. Wait, please. But Richard's voice thundered over hers. Thief, liar, parasite. He let the words hang in the air, savoring them. This is the filth we allow in our kitchens. The waiter dragged her toward the center of the dining room. Customers craned their necks. Margaret's lips trembled as she tried to ask her son for clarity, but Richard waved her off. For a heartbeat, Ava felt the abyss yawning open beneath her. Everything she had endured, the whispers, the disdain, the poverty waiting at home, it would end here, in disgrace. She would lose her job, her means to feed her mother and brother, her chance at exposing the truth. But then resolve surged up like fire. She planted her feet. The waiter's grip slipped as she tore free. Her voice rang out, higher than she thought possible. I am not a thief. I am telling the truth. The room froze. With trembling hands, Ava reached into her uniform pocket. From within she pulled a small digital recorder, battered but intact. She clicked it on. A voice, deep and unmistakable, filled the restaurant. When she's weak enough, then we make her sign. The assets transfer clean. The doctor knows what to prescribe. It won't take long. Gasps erupted. Diners looked from Richard to Margaret, from Margaret back to Ava. Ava's voice shook, but her words were clear. For weeks I have watched. I've listened. He has been working with lawyers and accountants to strip his mother of everything she owns. He hired a doctor. False credentials, false compassion, to poison her, little by little, to weaken her until she could no longer refuse. That contract he guards so tightly, it's fraud. Tonight he planned to have her sign it. She lifted the folder Richard had seized back into the air. pages spilling slightly. I risked everything to bring it into the light. Margaret's face drained of color. Her hands trembled violently as she signed, "No, Richard." Richard lunged toward Ava, fury breaking through his polished facade. "You little rat. You think you can slander me? I'll make sure you regret this." The staff, loyal to Richard, moved to restrain her again. Martin barked, "Enough of this nonsense. Take her out." But something had shifted. A man at a corner table, a businessman with a silver tie, raised his phone camera recording. A woman in pearls did the same. Soon half a dozen diners were filming, their screens glowing like spotlights. The tide turned with the press of buttons. The silence of complicity fractured. "Don't touch her. Let her speak. This needs to be seen." Richard froze, realizing too late the shift in power. The evidence was no longer confined to Ava's trembling hands. It was multiplying, captured in every angle, ready to outlive this night. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears, her frail hands fluttering helplessly. The truth she had suspected, feared, but never named now laid bare before her, and before the world. And Ava, standing in the center of it all, bruised by humiliation yet unbroken, met Richard's gaze with fire. "You called me trash, but trash doesn't carry proof. Trash doesn't risk everything to save someone else. What does that make you?" The words lingered, searing. The restaurant that once sneered at her now buzzed with a new energy. Shock, outrage, awakening. Ava felt the weight of every eye on her, not with scorn this time but with something closer to recognition. The battle was far from over. Richard still commanded the building, the staff, the power of fear. But for the first time the fortress had cracks, and Ava had lit the fuse. The restaurant was no longer breathing, every eye fixed on Richard Whitmore, every phone camera trained to catch his reaction. And for the first time all night, his polished mask wavered. Margaret Whitmore's hands trembled against the linen tablecloth. Her voice was frail, but her question carried the weight of decades of trust. "Is this true?" Her son did not blink. "Of course not." His tone was sharp, dismissive, an attempt to seize control. He held the folder against his chest, as if proximity alone could erase its contents. "She's lying. She's a thief. You can't believe a word from her." But Ava Johnson's recorder still played. The voice, Richard's voice, filled the room again. "When she's weak enough, then we make her sign." The words echoed like a death knell. Margaret recoiled as though struck, her body folding inward, grief and disbelief tearing through her in equal measure. Gasps rippled around the room. Then a man at the corner table rose, his tailored suit gleaming under the chandelier. His voice was steady, sharp. "This is elder abuse." The words, spoken aloud, broke the last of the silence. Whispers surged into open outrage. Unthinkable. His own mother. Criminal. Richard spun toward the diners, his composure fraying. "You don't understand. This is a setup. She's manipulating you." His finger jabbed toward Ava, his voice trembling with rage. "She's nothing. She's garbage dressed in an apron." But the faces staring back at him no longer looked convinced. They looked appalled. And then another voice rose, calm, authoritative. Edward Barnes, Margaret's personal lawyer, a dignified man in his 60s with silver hair and steady eyes, stood from his table. He had accompanied Margaret quietly tonight, as he often did. Now his voice cut through the chaos. "I'm calling the police." He pulled out his phone and dialed, his words deliberate, meant for every ear in the restaurant. "This evidence will be submitted immediately. You'll answer for this, Richard." Panic flared in Richard's eyes. He turned, searching for allies among the staff. But Martin Hale and the waiters hesitated, their loyalty shaken under the glare of half a dozen recording phones. The fortress Richard had relied on was crumbling before him. Then came the final blow. Ava, moving swiftly, darted toward the double doors at the front of the restaurant. With a decisive click she locked them. The sound of the bolt sliding home rang out like a gavel. Richard's face twisted. "What do you think you're doing?" She stood firm, her hands trembling, but her voice steady.
making sure the truth doesn't run away tonight. Gasps turned to murmurs of approval. A woman in pearls whispered, "Brave girl." Richard lunged a step toward her, fury igniting, but Margaret's voice cut him off, thin, cracked, but fierce. "Enough." She rose unsteadily, clutching the table for support. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her whole body shaking. Yet her words carried a steel that had been dormant too long. "I gave you life, and you would take mine for money." Richard faltered, the accusation striking deeper than any evidence. Margaret turned to Ava, her frail hands reaching, clasping the young woman's tightly. "You saved my life. You gave me back my voice." Ava's eyes blurred, her chest tightening. "You deserve better. You once helped my family through your foundation, though you never knew my name. When I saw the signs of danger, I couldn't stay silent while the woman who had helped us was being destroyed." Margaret sobbed openly, clinging to her. "Bless you, child. Bless you." The room erupted in noise, sirens approaching, diners pressing forward, phones recording every angle. Richard struggled, shouting, but two security officers summoned by Edward Barnes' call and emboldened by the watching crowd seized him. "This isn't over." Richard spat, thrashing as cuffs bit into his wrists. "You'll regret this." But the words sounded hollow, stripped of their power. Cameras caught every grimace, every futile struggle. By the time uniformed officers arrived, the verdict was already sealed in the court of public witness. Richard Whitmore, once untouchable heir of a gilded empire, was led through the locked doors not as master but as prisoner, and Margaret, still trembling, stood with Ava at her side, their hands joined, both women illuminated in the chandelier's glow. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore empire reeled. News outlets devoured the story. The attempted exploitation of an elderly widow, the betrayal by her only son, the courage of a young waitress who refused to be silenced. Board members resigned, shares plummeted, investigations deepened. The name Richard Whitmore became synonymous with scandal. But for Margaret Whitmore, freedom had returned. With Edward Barnes' guidance, she regained full control of her estate.
And with a new decision born from gratitude, she invited Ava into her world, not as a servant, but as her personal assistant and interpreter. Ava traded her stained apron for a crisp suit. She walked at Margaret's side through meetings, charity events, boardrooms, where men once sneered, but now nodded with respect. Each day she learned more about philanthropy, about leadership, about carrying dignity with quiet strength. Her mother's medicines were paid for, her brother enrolled in better schools. The weight that had once bent Ava's back began to lift. One morning, as dawn spilled through the city, Margaret and Ava stepped out of the restaurant where their lives had collided. Ava's uniform was gone. In its place, a tailored jacket gleamed under the morning light. Her head was high, her shoulders square. She was no longer the timid waitress ignored and ridiculed. She was a young woman who had faced power, spoken truth, and rewritten her fate. Together, the old widow and the young waitress walked into the sunrise. Two voices, once silenced, now carrying forward, stronger than ever. And the story left its lesson, etched in every heart that heard it. Wealth can corrupt, power can betray, but truth, spoken with courage, can restore dignity and change destiny. Some betrayals wound deeper than any blade, the kind that come not from strangers, but from those meant to protect us. We watched as wealth and power tried to silence both truth and compassion. Yet it was not privilege that prevailed, but courage. Ava Johnson, dismissed as insignificant, risked everything to protect a woman the world assumed was beyond harm. And in exposing deception, she restored dignity where it had nearly been erased. Margaret Whitmore regained her voice. Ava found her own. The lesson is stark. Injustice thrives on silence, but it crumbles when even the smallest voice dares to speak. In the end, it isn't power that defines justice. It's courage strong enough to confront it.